Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Transitioning Your Crews to Cordless, sponsored by EGO and hosted by Green Industry Pros. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah Webb, and I'm the editor of Green Industry Pros. As we all know, battery power is becoming a huge topic in the green industry. In turn, this webinar will focus on how landscape professionals can both understand and manage a new fuel source. Again, thanks for joining us today. We have a great expert to talk about this topic. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. On your screen should be a tool on the left-hand side for you to enter and submit questions. Please type in your questions throughout the webinar. We've set aside some time at the end for our expert to get through as many as we can. There is also a box within the platform with some informational content from EGO. And please take a minute after the webinar to complete the survey that can also be found on the audience console. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be on demand within 24 hours afterward. You'll be able to find it through the link that was sent to you from registering or on greenindustrypros.com. Without further delay, let me introduce today's expert. Tim Baker is Director of Product Development and Front-End Development, Outdoor Power Equipment for Chervon North America. With over 20 years of expertise in product management and marketing, Tim has been at the forefront of EGO Commercial's initiatives to electrify the commercial OPE sector. Before joining Chervon, Tim honed his skills at industry giants Honeywell and Bosch, where he held key roles in product management, marketing, and engineering. His extensive experience and strategic approach continue to drive significant advancements in DC OPE. Tim lives in the greater Chicago area with his family and enjoys gardening, camping, hunting, and fishing. From here, I'll let Tim take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. So let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. So we'll start out by just covering a couple of basics. We'll have a quick poll question here in a second, but to start out with, I think anybody who's in the professional landscaping community can agree that time is money and maximizing uptime is critical. And that's one of the things that we're really going to keep in perspective as we walk through how to navigate this transition from gas to cordless. But I'd like to start with a poll question and understand a little bit more about, from an audience perspective, what best describes your interest in cordless. So do you have laws and ordinances that are forcing you to switch? Do you have clients that are asking for cordless or perhaps quieter technology or managing noise? Or do you think that your cordless that cordless could make your business more efficient? So I'll give you a few seconds to answer this question. I'll tell you from my perspective, I've certainly talked to landscapers that really cover the whole gamut, from folks that are 100% committed to gas and will come kicking and screaming into the cordless world. Folks that have learned how to adopt cordless voluntarily without any ordinances and have learned to make their businesses more profitable as a result, and then really everything in between. So, all right, we've got about, looks like about 30% of attendees that have answered. So again, I'll give you a few more seconds to answer. Don't forget to hit the submit button if you've answered, because it looks like we're still only at about 38% or so. Give it a few more seconds. Probably went backwards after I said that. All right, so let's take a look. About half of you answered now. So looks like we've got a pretty good mix. Not surprisingly, about a third of you say that law and ordinances are forcing you to switch. Interesting that about half are saying that you've got clients asking for cordless. Seeing more and more of that. I can tell you that what I've seen, as an example, went to Florida, talked to some landscapers there who, after COVID and after the kind of explosion of remote work, had a lot of folks that decided to move south, move to Florida, into condos and apartment complexes, on calls just like this, Teams calls during the day. And it was disturbing their work to have gas OPE running outside of their buildings. And so they were complaining to their landlords And some landscapers there found that they could actually charge more by switching to cordless and offering that as a guaranteed service. So certainly have seen that. Good to see too that about 19% of you are saying that cordless can make your business more efficient potentially. So we'll talk a little bit about how to make that happen today. All right, so these are the 5 questions that I typically get, that my team typically gets when we talk to landscapers and talk to them about their concerns, their thoughts about switching to cordless. I can tell you that the first 3, we typically, or landscapers typically discover in reverse order. So that 3rd bullet, how do I make sure that my crews don't run out of power throughout the day, is the first question they ask, and the first thing they consider when they're switching to cordless. And it goes the reverse order then. So then after they choose a cordless system, then they realize, oh man, now I need to look at potentially switching from open trailers to enclosed trailers or vans. They start thinking about their vehicles and what charging overnight might look like. And then last but not least, they discover that maybe they don't have enough power infrastructure in their building to support chargers and the like, and look into then hiring an electrician to make those electrical infrastructure upgrades. So it's interesting how they typically discover those things in the reverse order that we've got them. The reason that we have them in the order that we're showing is because it's better to plan ahead, right? It's better to understand and first, get a sense of what you have in your building and what your building's capable of today, what upgrades you might need to consider in the future. Then start to think about, can I get by with the vehicles that I have today and the trailers that I have today, or am I going to have to make an adjustment there? And then start to choose a cordless system that works for you and make that switch and transition as it suits you. Then you can start to think about, from a battery perspective and power management, how do I handle the spikes in my power demand? So we'll get into that. And last but not least, we'll talk about how to service and maintain your cordless products as well. So let's get started. Before we get into these 5 questions, I think it would be helpful to just spend a couple of minutes talking about Electricity 101. We're not going to get into deep physics and math here. We're just going to cover some of the very basics so that we're talking a common language. First, watts are an important one. So what is a watt? Watts are the unit of power. Think of watts as similar to horsepower. So the more watts you have, the more power you have. Volts and amps are the other key metrics to think about with electricity. So volts are a measure of electrical potential, which is a fancy way of saying pressure. And then amps are a measure of current, which is a fancy way of saying how much electricity is flowing through something. And you're starting to see these terms like flowing and pressure. And what is that reminiscent of? Water. So for me, this is what made kind of the concept of electricity click. Obviously, electricity, you can't see, it's invisible, it's a little bit harder to visualize. I'm personally a visual person, so this really helped me to understand that voltage is analogous to pressure in a pipe or pressure in a hose. Current is analogous to then the size of the hose or the amount of water flowing through it, in this case, the amount of electrons flowing through it. And the really important equation to remember then is that watts equals volts times amps. So if watts equals energy, then how do we measure the capacity or the amount of, let's say, gas in the tank, right? Or the electrical equivalent of that, and that's watt hours. So watt hours are the unit of energy capacity. Instead of gallons in the tank, we've got watt hours in the pack. For those of you that aren't necessarily familiar with the metric system, you've got kilos is the prefix for kilowatt hour. So 1,000 watt hours is 1 kilowatt hour. And again, just trying to get you familiar with some of the terminology that you're going to hear as you start to make this migration. Now, one of the very common questions that I get is, isn't amp hours the capacity in a battery? Sort of is the answer to that. Amp hours tells you the capacity for a given voltage, but watt hours are voltage independent. So let me explain what that means. So if I have an 18-volt battery pack that is 8 amp hours and a 56-volt battery pack that is 8 amp hours, they sound like they're the same because they're both 8 amp hours, but that voltage actually is an important component. And we'll talk about that here in one of these subsequent slides. I'll show you some examples of then how to calculate watt hours. Before we get to that calculation, though, I wanted to share this reference for you, and this is a good one to maybe screen cap or keep in mind. It's a quick reference of max and nominal voltages. So let me explain really quickly what those are. And obviously for common brands. So max voltage is the voltage of a battery pack at 100% state of charge. So when it's fully charged for each one of these brands, the left-hand column represents approximately what you'd get in the voltage across the positive and negative terminals. Might be plus or minus a few volts, but generally speaking, this is what you'll get. When you get down to 0% state of charge, it's actually going to be below that right-hand column, the nominal number. But the nominal represents roughly the average voltage of a pack as you go from 100% state of charge all the way down to fully depleted. Now, why do manufacturers use one or the other? Has a little bit to do with history, has a little bit to do with legal regulations. Early days, Europe required manufacturers to report nominal. There was a gray area early days of lithium ion with the US in terms of how that was reported. So you used to see a lot of max. So they'd say 56 volt max or 20 volt max. For newer platforms, manufacturers have more or less moved to the max calculation because it's kind of the least confusing. It represents what the battery actually has at 100% state of charge. But regardless, just a little bit of trivia, a little bit of history for you on batteries. So again, the fun fact at the bottom there is just that at max voltage, you got the left-hand column. Somewhere in the middle, you're going to get that nominal voltage, and then you'll actually get below that at 0% state of charge. All right, so moving on. That quick math calculation I promised on watt hours. So there's two ways to think about watt hours. You've got gross watt hours, and then you've got the rated watt hours. So gross watt hours are the max voltage. So in this case, we've got an Ego Arc Lithium 56 volt, 8 amp hour battery shown on the left there. It's a 56 volt max battery, 8 amp hours capacity. When you multiply those, you get 448 gross watt hours. And I'll explain the difference between gross and rated in just a moment. To get to the nominal or rated watt hours, it's that nominal voltage times 8 amp hours. You'll see the max or gross watt hours reported oftentimes on batteries and battery labels, in marketing materials, and on the outside of packaging. And that's what really has driven gross watt hours is the different shippers in the US, so the UPSs and FedExes and DHLs of the world, typically require the gross watt hours to be reported on the packaging for hazmat shipping purposes. So that's typically why you see that rating. And then the rated or nominal watt hours is what you'd use as a landscaper or somebody who's trying to make some calculations around how much energy is actually usable in that pack. So that's the difference. That's how to calculate it. Just something to keep in mind as you're starting to plan in the future. You'll see where this becomes useful here as we work through the presentation. So the greater the watt hours, the more work a battery can do. That's the important thing to remember. So in your head, you can start to then think about how, if you have a lower voltage battery pack, you need significantly more amp hours to get to the same watt hours as a higher voltage pack, right? It's a really important thing to think about and distinction to make. So on to our next poll question. This is a bit of a trivia question. Which cell technology delivers more watt hours? Pouch cells, tablet cells, or good old-fashioned lithium-ion cells? And if you're not familiar with these terms or these technologies, don't feel bad. We're not all battery nerds. But for those who are, feel free to submit the answer. Don't forget to hit submit. Just as a little background as we're waiting for the answers to come in, good old-fashioned lithium-ion cells are what you've seen since the early 2000s in lithium-ion batteries. They're the cylindrical cells. And tablets are a newer variant of that actually provides more power out. And then pouch is yet another new technology. Instead of cylindrical cells, those are typically kind of shaped like they're rectangular in shape. So they're kind of a flatter pouch shape. And they have their own, sets of benefits that we can talk about, but ultimately curious here about which one delivers more watt hours, so power out. Give it a few more seconds. I'm sorry, not power out, but capacity. By the way, some examples in the market of who's using these. So pouch cells, you'll see in Flex Power Tools, Stack Lithium batteries, or DeWalt's Power Stack as an example. Tabless, you might see in Milwaukee's Forge batteries. Also, I think Milwaukee's got some pouch in their Forge as well. So these are relatively new technologies, but things you'll see in the market. All right, about half of you have answered. Let's go ahead and see what the poll looks like. Interesting, almost a third in terms of, which one delivers more watt hours. Remember, when we talk about which one delivers more watt hours, we're saying like which one delivers more usable energy per pound or per square unit area, per square inch, right? Well, the answer is they're all about the same. Now, like I mentioned, pouch actually can deliver more power out. Tablets can deliver more power out. But when it comes to how much energy is actually contained in the battery, so if you had, let's say you had a battery that was exactly the same size for all three of these different technologies, they're all going to deliver about the same watt hours. In other words, they have about the same amount of gas in the tank. So the reason for that is they all use very similar chemistries on the inside. So they're constructed differently, but they're using different chemistry on the inside. That chemistry, that construction allows them to have maybe some other benefits, one versus the other. Things like how much power they can deliver or how many cycles they can last before they start to degrade. But when it comes to the amount of gas in the tank, the amount of electrons in the tank in this case, they're all about the same. So, for now, we're all kind of, regardless of these new technologies that are coming, there's nothing that's really driving the ability for a much smaller battery to run, say, a backpack blower all day or a walk-behind mower all day. I think the technology to be able to do that is still years off at this point. So next, let's talk about maximizing, it looks like, maximizing uptime. So we're getting into our 5 questions now. We're going to start with, do I need to upgrade the electrical service in my building? What I'd say is the best thing to do to start out with is to have an electrician assess the remaining capacity of your service panel. So this is really important to understand, how many amps do you have coming into your building? How many open potential 120 volts, 20 amp or 10 or 15 amp circuits do you have, or 240? Get a sense for that before you start to decide how and when you're going to migrate to cordless. That'll help you to plan future infrastructure upgrades. It'll help you understand what you're capable of doing now. It's the best way to get started. And then as you start to consider different manufacturers' cordless platforms, take a close look at the charging systems and understand how much energy they consume. So if you're looking at using chargers that can charge batteries very quickly, understand that you might only be able to connect 2 or 3 of those chargers per circuit, which means 2 or 3 batteries per circuit. As you can imagine, you'll very quickly run out of circuits then to be able to power batteries and charge them overnight. So you really have to understand how the manufacturers you're considering, how their charging systems work. And then, like I said, at the end of the day, you can determine if you need to upgrade immediately. I think in most cases, if you choose correctly, if you choose wisely, you'll be able to at least start to convert a few crews likely before having to do any major electrical upgrade. So as I just mentioned, with the right charging solutions, you can really recharge batteries to drive a whole maintenance crew's handheld OPE, backpack blowers, walk-behind mowers overnight on a single circuit. Where things become a little bit more interesting is when you start to consider cordless commercial ZTR. So if you look at the range of different manufacturers' cordless commercial ZTRs in the market, you'll find a range of different ways that they charge. Some do have charging options that work on 120 volt, 15 amp or 20 amp circuits. They will take a long time to charge depending on the size of the battery. They may not charge overnight. So for that reason, you should really consider options that provide you a level of future proofing, especially if you're going to have an electrician touch your panel anyway. Think about installing systems that would support level 2 EVSC or electrical vehicle supply equipment compatibility. That's a very fancy way of saying wall chargers, right? EV wall chargers is what I'm talking about now. So, you know, today you're thinking about upgrading OPE to cordless, but tomorrow you might be thinking about upgrading your trucks or vans to EVs. And it would be nice to have that capability already built in as you're considering your OPE upgrade. So the best way to future-proof is to think about having NEMA 1450 compatible outlets, 240 volt outlets installed, because any of your level 2 chargers for EVs will have an option that will allow you to plug into a NEMA 1450. Charging solutions in the future for OPE will be able to plug into that. So with today's OPE, you'll be able to get by with 120 volt. As you're starting to think about then running electrical outside of your building to be able to power trailers to charge overnight, that's when you're going to want to start to think about NEMA 1450 upgrades in the future. So again, doesn't need to necessarily happen tomorrow, but good to get an assessment of your panel, understand what you're going to need, plan ahead, budget ahead for electrical infrastructure upgrades that allow you to be able to grow into cordless over time. So a quick shameless plug for the Ego Commercial PGX charging system. One of the nice things about our charging system is it allows you to scale and experiment with cordless without having to do any of these electrical infrastructure upgrades that I'm talking about. So runs off of 110, 120 volt, 15 amp or 20 amp circuit out of the box. You can get into this system for well less than $1,000 to just trial it and understand if it's going to work for you. And then rather than having to reinvest in something new, you can build on that system up to 70 batteries. So it scales with your business. And additionally, we have off-grid solutions that are very helpful in especially managing spikes in energy demand as the seasons change for you or as your demand in OPE changes throughout the season. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. So the second question is, do I need to upgrade or change my vehicles and trailers? Things to consider as you're deciding this is, first of all, weather. Are the products you're considering rated for outdoor storage? What I would suggest is, even if they are rated for outdoor storage, like anything else, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's gas OPE or outdoor furniture, we all know that if we protect those products when they're not in use, they're going to last longer. So regardless, I would encourage you to consider, if you currently are running open trailers or pickup trucks only, think about enclosed trailers, think about vans longer term. Charging, will you be charging on the vehicle or trailer or in a building? This has a lot to do with actually the third point here, which is security. Security is, I'm not going to lie to you, is a challenge as you switch to cordless, and you have to think about that, because as many of you, I'm sure, are dealing with theft now. As you switch to cordless, now you've got high value batteries that are even easier to steal out of the back of the trailer. So, you know, certainly think about if you are at the scale of business where you've got a yard that you can protect with fencing security systems. I've even seen high voltage, you know, deterrent lines around the tops of fences to keep thieves out. The important thing is, if you can manage to find ways to charge on the vehicle or trailer overnight, that is the most efficient way to run. You know, it stands through, it's common sense, right? That you're not having to actually unload batteries, put them on chargers within your building, and then bring them back out in the morning fully charged. If you can do all that within the trailer, run power out to your trailers or vans, that's a much more efficient way to work. So not something you need to do on day one, something you need to consider though, moving forward as potentially the best way to operate. How do I make sure my crews don't run out of power during the day? So this can be a bit of a spreadsheet exercise, and there's really 3 steps to this. First, equipment. What are you planning on converting to cordless first? What are you using today that you want to convert to cordless? So create a list of the equipment that you would convert to cordless. Then use manufacturers' runtime guides, online calculators, leverage the new knowledge I just gave you on how to calculate watt hours in a pack. Calculate your energy needs, right? Understand what energy you're going to need to be able to run those products throughout the day. And then, seems obvious, but you really want to have a charge port for every battery. Ideally, you don't want to be charging in the middle of the day for most of the season. I think there are probably times throughout the season where you're going to have to find ways to charge remotely. You know, where I live in the Chicagoland area, I'm thinking fall cleanup season where you're using a lot of blowers, or you're using walk-behinds or Z's to mulch leaves into lawns, that sort of thing. Or certainly during May, where grass is growing 2-3 inches a week if we're getting the right rain and heat. You know, you're going to have spikes in demand. We're going to talk about spikes in demand, but make sure that you've got a charge port for every battery. Plan for the worst case scenario. So plan for spring and fall cleanup, whatever the high demand season might be for your particular region or where you're operating. Make sure that you're adding a 20% buffer to protect against downtime. 20% is just sort of a rule of thumb. This is one of those things that you'll have to experiment with a little bit to understand exactly what you're going to need, which brings us to our next topic, and that is going to be managing spikes in demand. But before we get to that, I wanted to touch on our power manager. So we have a tool that kind of takes the spreadsheets out of the equation and allows you just to use this web-based tool or app-based tool called, or I'm sorry, it's web-based either way, but it's also mobile friendly. Power Manager asks you a few simple questions about your crews, how they operate, and then what equipment you want to convert, then gives you options for batteries and charging that you can adjust if you'd like, shows you in real time how those adjustments potentially give you that buffer that we're talking about. And then in the end, gives you a list of product to go have an informed discussion with your dealer about in terms of purchase. Really great tool. We're continuing to build on it and make it better and better as time goes. So check it out. And you know, hopefully that can help you make this migration without having to build really complicated spreadsheets to you know, make those calculations. And a quick pro tip, as you're considering different systems, whether it's Evo Commercial or another one, think about how you could potentially move energy from ZTRs to handheld batteries. And I suppose this only applies to those of you who are seriously considering cordless ZTRs today. But also think about the future. You know, if you anticipate, you know, in the next 2-3 years, or even 3 to 5 years, eventually moving to cordless ZTRs or being required to do that, you're going to want to invest in a platform that works well for you in terms of being able to move energy around. Let's talk about that a little bit more in this next section. How do I handle spikes in power demand? 50 to 70% of your upfront conversion costs for cordless are going to be batteries and chargers. So wrap your head around that a little bit. That's a significant investment. And that's why I'm saying, think about the future. Think about ultimately, if you're planning on 2, 3, 5 years down the road, eventually going all cordless, including Z's or other wheeled equipment, think about a platform, a single platform. You don't want to have to be shifting platforms and making that battery investment all over again 2 or 3 years from now. So think about investing in a platform that'll support you for the long term. You want to be able to move energy ultimately from ZTRs to other equipment, and here's why. This chart shows the energy consumption of typical cordless OPE. As you can see, by and large, what's consuming most of your energy throughout the day is ZTRs. We're talking about up to 10 kilowatts of energy per hour, significant amount of energy, right? And that's why commercial cordless Zs are so expensive. You know, you're spending $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on a cordless Z, and the reason you're spending that much is you're buying a giant battery. Well, you don't want to have to just use that giant battery in that ZTR. You want to be able to move that energy around. Now, there's different ways to do that we'll talk about in a subsequent slide, but consider that as you're considering cordless Zs. As you go down the chain here, walk-behind mowers and backpack blowers are your next biggest offenders in terms of energy consumption. That's why it's really important to think about a battery platform that can extend to these products and be able to provide you with at least an hour to 2 hours of runtime before having to switch batteries. The smaller battery platforms will struggle to be able to do that. Some manufacturers with smaller battery platforms, when I say smaller battery platforms, by the way, I'm talking about like anything from 18 to 40 volt. Some of those manufacturers are kind of compensating for that by coming out with a separate, additional battery platform that works for backpack blowers, maybe connects to walk-behind mowers. But then, unfortunately, you're stuck with having this second or third battery platform that only works for those products. So when you're considering cordless battery platforms, consider a system that's going to give you the most flexibility. That's going to allow you to move energy freely from these different categories of tools and do that with the fewest number of battery platforms possible. So let's talk a little bit about how you move energy from ZTRs to other equipment. There's really three methods for doing that. And different manufacturers employ different methods. So the first one is kind of the most obvious. It's plug-in solutions. So it's moving energy from equipment to equipment. You buy a commercial ZTR. It's got a 24 or 30 kilowatt hour integrated battery. You paid $40,000, $50,000 from that machine. Probably 2/3 of that cost that you paid was for that integrated battery. The way you get that energy out of that integrated battery for some manufacturers is to directly transfer it out with a cable and some sort of interim charger that works with that Z. This is your least flexible option because it means that, let's think about the scenario of fall cleanup. If I need that extra energy that's locked up in that ZTR for my backpack blowers, I need to get that energy out of that ZTR when I'm, on a client site and into my backpack blower. That means that regardless of whether or not I need that Z during the day, I need to have it on my trailer because it's basically my energy tank. I'm draining energy out of that with this direct power transfer cable to my handheld batteries for my backpack blower. So that's why we're calling this kind of the least flexible option, because you actually have to lug that whole Z along with you to be able to do that. The second option is removable batteries. So this is where you have a ZTR that has batteries that can be removed without tools. So they're designed to be removable and transferable from product to product. Some manufacturers, and Eagle Commercial is included in here with, if you happen to see our future ZTR that we're working on at the Equip Show or other places, designed to have removable high capacity batteries that work in a power bank for DC to DC charging. So you take those individual high capacity batteries out of your ZTR. You can then just take those batteries and put them in your trailer versus having to load your entire ZTR into the trailer, and then put them into a DC to DC power bank. And that gives you complete flexibility in terms of being able to use that power to then recharge during the day, backpack blowers or walk behind mowers or wherever you need that extra capacity outside of the ZTR. The third and final option is swappable batteries. So swappable batteries are what you would find in Ego or some Greenworks or some Toro residential ZTRs, where they're using handheld batteries in the ZTR. We're using handheld batteries in our ZTR, right? And that gives you the most flexibility, but really geared towards homeowners because, unless you're wanting to swap out those batteries in your ZTR 3, 4, 5 times a day, you're not going to have the capacity that you need to run a commercial crew for hours on end. So the other challenge is, even though technically those batteries that are in those residential ZTRs are classified as handheld, they're typically going to be the higher capacity batteries that would be a bit heavy for your string trimmers, your hedge trimmers. So it's the least flexible option for commercial. It's the most flexible option if you're a residential user. So for us in the commercial world, the most flexible and kind of best suited commercial option is number 2, having removable batteries. But I at least wanted to walk through kind of the 3 options for you. So moving on to the last step in our 5-point journey here. How do I service and maintain cordless products? It's pretty straightforward. If it's not engine related, you likely still need to do it. So lubrication, blade and chain sharpening, wear items like edger blades or lawnmower blades or string trimmer line, of course, you still have to replace or maintain all those things. Cleaning might be a little bit different in that, can still certainly use compressed air, blowers, even, hosing off equipment, no problem. Would stay away from pressure washers with cordless, because there you have the option to really drive water into electronics where you don't want it. But any of those other 3 options are still perfectly reasonable. At least speaking for Ego commercial products, which are all IPX5 rated on the commercial side. One thing that you'll certainly have to do and you'll run into is your techs at the beginning will be somewhat uncomfortable with going from gas to now servicing or maintaining cordless products. So lean on your manufacturing partner for training for electronics and drive systems. At Ego Commercial, we've got face-to-face service tech training here in Naperville that we offer. On occasion, we will travel to do that as well. We've got lots of online training options as well, and a whole portal full of training for our dealers. So and large landscapers as well. So lots of different options. Hit us up if you need that, or whoever your manufacturing partner might be. And then I wanted to touch on some of the most common failure areas of cordless tools as well. So circuit boards, switches, damaged frayed wiring, these are all the most common things that we see over time. One question that I get quite a bit are brushless motors. Do they fail? Do they need maintenance? They generally do not need any maintenance. They generally do not fail. Not to say that you will not have a failed brushless motor. It certainly happens. But most of the failures that you're going to see on brushless motors are what we call infant failures. In other words, you'll see it within the first few hours of operation, and that's rare. But if it happens, that's typically when it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, then your other things will fail before the motors fail. This slide was really for more for reference. I'll just touch on it really quickly. Don't get too caught up in all the tiny bullets and words. I really wanted to more or less just show the different types of batteries and ultimately what it means in terms of cycle life for batteries. So lithium iron phosphate batteries are, you're starting to see more in the EV industry. You'll start to see them creep more into OPE, but primarily for ZTRs because it's a much heavier chemistry than the other 3. What's great about LFP is it's low cost relative to the other 3, and it has very high cycle life. So as an example, for Ego Commercial, we're using LFP chemistry in our high capacity battery that we'll have in our commercial, that we'll use for our power bank as well, as part of our PGX system. The other 3 all use the same chemistry. If you go back to our polling question, I mentioned that, right? They all have NMC, which stands for nickel, manganese, cobalt, sorry, and then nickel, cobalt, aluminum. It's really the form factor that's different. We talked about that already during the poll question, so I won't belabor it. The important thing to take away is that chart on the right. So LFP gives you the best cycle life, followed by pouch, tablets, and then your kind of traditional cells. Looking at this, you'd think, well, then why wouldn't I just invest in pouch for everything? And the answer is pretty simple. It's around cost. Pouch is going to be highest cycle life, but it's also going to be the most expensive. And, if you look at the traditional batteries, you're talking about 500 to 700 charge cycles. So, even in a very heavy use scenario, you're still getting 2+ years of life out of those batteries in a much more economical way, especially if you're having to buy into cordless for the first time and make a heavy investment. That's going to be your most cost-effective way to do so. Another question that I get very often is about serviceability of batteries. It's funny, I think a lot of users, I see this on social all the time, they think that manufacturers conspire to not make batteries serviceable to get folks to buy new batteries. And I'll tell you that that's absolutely not the case. If we had a technical solution to make a serviceable battery easy and cost effective, we would absolutely do it. I'm going to touch very briefly and very, very high level on the reasons why they're not serviceable. Batteries, take an Ego 56-volt battery, it's got anywhere from 14 to 192 individual cylindrical cells in it. If one of those cells goes bad, imagine having to then diagnose which one of those cells has gone bad. Imagine having to, completely disassemble the pack, desolder that one cell, replace it. That's hard enough and actually comes with significant risk. On top of all that, those batteries that are in that, those cells that are in that battery, they're all matched at the factory to have similar capacity, voltage, and internal resistance. And that's really important because it drives that battery to basically behave as one single unit. If you were to just replace one cell in that battery and it's not matched to the others, the likelihood of it experiencing a higher level of heat is significant. And then that can result in all sorts of catastrophic failures that we don't even want to talk about. So this is why it's so hard to make these batteries serviceable. Again, if we had a solution for it, we would certainly do it. That being said, there are some things you can do to extend the life of your battery. My two biggest recommendations would be minimizing temp extremes and charging to 80 to 90%. So you can minimize temp extremes. The obvious way, certainly, ideally don't have your batteries locked up in an enclosed trailer during the day, or if you do, have some sort of passive or active ventilation in your trailer. And I'm not expecting anybody to have air conditioning installed in their trailer, but there are some pretty simple solutions on the market to have what I would call passive cooling, and that would be, like a roof vent or side vents that allow air to flow as you're driving from site to site, or even active ventilation, which would be, a roof fan that runs off of the aux 12 volt to your vehicle, or other means to just keep air flowing. Even if you can bring the ambient temperature in that trailer down from, you can get as hot as 150, 160 plus, even hotter than that, down to 120, 130, it'll make a world of difference. So try to minimize temp extreme. And then charging to 80 to 90%, not all manufacturers support this. I can tell you that in Ego Commercial, the PGX system combined with our Fleet app actually allow you to select charging to only 80 to 90%. And that will certainly extend the cycle life of your battery. Last slide. Wanted to just very quickly touch on some resources as well as optimizing operator behavior. So very natural for operators to use their cordless products like gas products. They typically, I see them using the trigger the way that they would with gas, or continuing to allow the motor to run or idle in between when they're using it. Very easy to switch things off on the cordless side. So if you're done mowing, you're moving to a different location with a walk-behind mower, but you're just pushing it, turn it off, turn it back on when you get to where you're going. Same with backpack blowers. Sounds simple, but watch your operators when they switch to cordless, and you'll see them continue to use the same behaviors they did with gas. So a little bit of retraining required. Operating speeds can be a tricky one. With things like backpack blowers, obviously the faster you're blowing, the faster you're going in terms of getting work done. Mowers are a little bit different though, a little bit more nuanced there, where it's worth it to experiment, especially with blade speed. Your travel speed is what it is, and you're going to want to operate at the same speeds you were with, your gas equipment. Your actual blade speeds, you'll want to make as low as possible, still getting the results that you and your clients expect. And so that's something to experiment with to try to conserve energy throughout the day. And then pre and post route routines, some pretty obvious stuff around, they're no longer having to mix 2-cycle fuel. They're no longer having to refill tanks and move them on and off of a trailer, but they are having to make sure that all the batteries are on the chargers. They are having to make sure that the trailer is plugged in at the end of the shift. So, just making sure that you're thinking about and accounting for that in your planning and shifting forward. Some good additional resources. So America Green Zone Alliance, AGZA, has training and certifications for down to the operator level. Good resource to take advantage of. And then, of course, Green Industry Pros. I personally love the Chirps Up Radio. A lot of really good topics covered, experts brought on. That's just one of many resources on Green Industry Pros, so check that out as well. And with that, I think we're ready to move to Q&A.
Thanks so much, Tim, for all of that information. Wrapping up here, it does look like we have a few questions coming in from the audience. The first one, when is the PGX commercial charging going to launch?
So the PGX system is now fully launched and fully available. So please reach out to your EGO dealer for access. If you go to our website, there is a dealer locator on there if you're not sure where your local EGO commercial dealer is.
All right, let's see, another question. What is the lifespan of the ZTR battery?
So the ZTR battery, the new commercial ZTR battery is using that lithium iron phosphate technology. So you've got between 2,000 and 3,000 cycles with LFP.
All right, and then what about the disposal of batteries? How is this done? What are the costs of that look like? Is this a future concern?
Sorry, one last point I wanted to make on cycle life. So 2,000 to 3,000 cycles before you get to 80% of the original capacity. So batteries do actually continue to operate well beyond those 2,000 to 3,000 cycles. You're just going to see a degradation in the amount of runtime that you get. So going back to the second question about recycling. So on all of our batteries, we have a 1-800 number that you can call. It's a call to recycle. It's a government-sponsored program that helps and allows for battery recycling. So check that out. If you talk to Call to Recycle, you go to their website, they'll show where the closest local drop-off is for you for those batteries to be recycled.
All right, let's see, another question coming in here. Are you aware of how to obtain funding for equipment?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because it varies quite a bit, not just state to state, but down to the county level or municipal level sometimes. So the best thing to do is just check with your local government and see what opportunities are available there. It's something that in the future, I think we'd like to do as EGO Commercial is provide that as more of a resource. It's one of those things that's it's constantly changing. It's really hard to keep track of. So certainly understand and can empathize with the question, but that's your best course of action today.
All right, and then another question we have, what features make EGO batteries commercial grade?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our batteries are constructed or have been constructed commercial grade from the start, from 2014 when we first started EGO. And some of the things that we employ in our batteries, we're certainly using name brand cells across the board. Everything about the assembly is automated, from automated cell matching to automated laser welding and assembly. But I think, you'll find that of any pro level manufacturer. Some things that are specific to our batteries though would be We have fully potted circuit boards, which means that the circuit boards are actually encased in a rubber material that protects them from the elements, protects them from shock and vibration, and also allows us to have that IPX4 rating on our batteries. Full ventilation in our batteries. The way that the ARC design works is actually allows for air circulation around the cells. As you remember, just from a few slides ago, I said, do everything you can to keep your batteries cool. So the way our batteries are designed, they actually stay cooler than a number of the other batteries in the market. And our overmolded polycarbonate ABS housings are really designed to take a significant amount of impact and abuse. So whether it's the construction, the electronics, the battery management system, from the ground up, they were really designed for commercial from the start.
All right, and let's see, another question we have coming in. Ego Commercial PGX seems great, but how does its cost compare to purchasing standard chargers and kits?
Yeah, that's another good question. So what I'll say about PGX from a cost standpoint is, once you get to about the trailer level, it's significantly more cost effective than buying individual chargers. And it's hard to put a specific percentage on it. Once you get to multi-trailer, it's around 20%, and that's taking into account our things like our fleet discount. But the other thing to really consider with PGX is it's not just the savings that you're going to have on the chargers themselves. It's the savings on not having to upgrade your electrical infrastructure because it works on existing circuits.
Okay, another question. Do you have any way to track batteries?
We're working on a couple of different solutions that'll get deployed as part of our new fleet management app that'll be launching here early next year. So more to come on that, but today the answer is no. In the near future, yes, we will. And some of the solutions that we're coming out with are actually retrofittable to existing batteries.
Okay, let's see. A couple more questions coming in. One of them, how many different grades of batteries does Ego have?
Well, I'm not sure what's meant by grades, but all of our batteries are essentially at the same level. So it's not like we have batteries that are or are not commercial grade, as an example. They're all kind of at the same level. The important thing to think about when choosing an Ego battery is more about size, weight, and power output capacity. So if you go into that Power Manager tool that I mentioned, the Power Manager actually helps you select the right batteries for the OPE that you've matched it with. So in the Power Manager, like I said, you'll tell it a little bit about your crew. You'll answer some questions about what OPE you're looking to convert to cordless. The batteries it then recommends are batteries that are well matched to the tool that you've selected. So that's one good way to choose. Of course, the website also recommends the right batteries.
All right, and it looks like we're just about out of time. Tim, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today and thank Ego for sponsoring today's webinar. If there were any questions we did not get to, our expert will get back to you to get those questions answered. Again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been the webinar, Transitioning Your Cruise to Cordless, sponsored by Ego and hosted by Green Industry Pros. An archived version of the webinar will be available on demand at greenindustrypros.com. You can access it with the link you used for this webinar. And don't forget to check out the additional assets from Ego and fill out the survey, both located in the audience console. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.